Hi, everyone. Welcome to Foresight's Intelligent Corporation Group. Really, really happy to see you here. We have two wonderful presenters today. This is the part in the series where we get a little bit more into the bits and nitty gritty of what people in this group are working on. Last year, we started off with keynote presentations. This year, we have a few special ones. For example, the Zcash one. We're starting the book club on the Intelligent Corporation group book that will be starting this Sunday at 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. And so that was the book that really arose from many of your contributions as well to the draft that we presented through different seminars last year. So if you don't have an invite to that yet, then please let me know. It's on Substack, published already with Gitcoin bounties so that we can improve further on the book and with a lot of really wonderful guest presenters today. We have a little bit of a different talk. And this is really to showcase work of people that do really, really, really wonderful work that we invited into the group last year and that we cannot wait to hear from. And I'm super honored to be here in the same Zoom room with Chris Berg and Oliver. Chris, it's 4 a.m. where he is. He just gave it away. So I think really just thanks from everyone for joining at such an ungodly hour. And I'm super excited. You'll be starting us off to speak a little bit about your work. I think for those who may not know, Chris wrote a really wonderful book, which I'll share here in the chat. But if you're watching on YouTube, that should definitely be part of your reading stack on understanding the blockchain economy. And that has really quite, I think, a really well economics grounded approach to the blockchain and to the different cryptoeconomics that you can reinvent from there. So very, very happy to have him here. We talked a bunch about the Coase theorem already last year, so that could potentially be another point of conversation. And then afterwards, he'll be followed by Oliver Sauter, who will be updating a little bit on a more practical project that he's currently kickstarting, Memex, and another one which is more related to refi. And so since you, Chris, have also written a bunch on DeFi, we could perhaps have an interesting discussion on that too. But without wanting to give too much away, I'll be in the chat and I'll be sharing a few links to the things that I just spurted out here. And without further ado, Chris, the stage is yours. Thank you so much for joining at this crazy hour from RMIT. I know the work that you guys are doing is really appreciated by the group. So thanks for sharing it today.
No, I appreciate the time. I'm coming into this a little bit blank because these sessions are always at 4 a.m. or around that time. So I've been unable to join previously, but so forgive me for any missteps that I make. And also forgive me for mostly whispering because the rest of my family are asleep. So what I wanted to do, I will share this properly. Excuse me. Can you all see that?
Yep.
Awesome. All right. So what I wanted to do is very quickly and very fast, hopefully, just go through the way I think about and my colleagues at the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub think about cryptoeconomics, think about the economics and social science of cryptocurrency, Web3, blockchain, which I'm going to use actually fairly interchangeably. But there are some interesting the nuances that we can dive into if you're interested. So really, why do we find this an interesting field? Our thesis is really that blockchain and crypto presents us with an historically unprecedented opportunity for rapid institutional evolution and experimentation. So we can really rapidly, or we see really rapid changes and discovery process in the rules of the game for economies. And as an economist, as a economic historian, actually personally, I'm interested in the rules of the game. And in crypto, I see the rules of the game moving faster than ever before. I see more experimentation, more interest. So obviously that has lots of interesting implications. But the first one is the industry moves very, very fast, and many of my friends at Agoric are at the meeting, and we know exactly how fast everything moves in the space. But at the same time, and I'll get into this a little bit, the fact that we have to rebuild so many institutions to get to the decentralized goals that we're looking for means that we have to build a lot of stuff from the ground up. So sometimes the fast pace is obscuring actually a really difficult process of rebuilding institutional structures and finding new rules that suit the new environment. So we have through crypto this sort of simultaneous overlapping low cost discovery of institutions. What excites me about working with teams in this space is that we've got this enormous design space that we can work in, as well as, we're doing what we call institutional test in production, which is that in crypto, we're just releasing institutions with releasing new voting mechanisms, new community management systems, and just testing them live, just seeing how they go. Now, again, why do we actually care? It's because really institutional innovation, institutions are at the heart of economic growth. Institutional innovation will supercharge economic growth as we see it. Very briefly, and for context, this is the sort of modern cryptoeconomic stack as I see it right now. So obviously, down the bottom, you've got the telecommunications networks and hardware infrastructure, which I don't think we talk enough about in crypto. They support the layer one blockchains. So the blockchains that you probably, many of you would be familiar with, Bitcoin, Agoric, Algorand, Avalanche, and of course, Ethereum. On top of that, we can build different institutional asset types. So we've got the non-fungible tokens, which most people are familiar with, sort of the funny JPEGs on the internet. And then this ecosystem of fungible financial assets, some of which are like monies. So Bitcoin obviously is a money type instrument, some of which act like equity. We try not to say equity in the crypto industry because that has interesting SEC implications and ASIC in Australia implications, but they sort of can be kind of like equity instruments. And of course, DeFi, decentralized finance. To organize that, we have decentralized autonomous organizations and DAOs. And then we've got all this complex tooling that allows us to interface and to hopefully make the access to these technologies more efficient. Now, that's the abstract cryptoeconomic stack, but in practice, it actually looks like this. So it is a massive ecosystem of competing standards, of competing everything from the layer one blockchains to the NFT standards to the DeFi standards to the DAO structures. Is this enormous competing ecosystem of evolutionary discovery. And a couple of things have allowed that to occur. The first, really the primary one is this idea of forking. So in studies of entrepreneurship and innovation, we talk a lot about fast follow in innovation or fast follow entrepreneurship. In the crypto space, we don't just see fast follow, we see fast copy. So people will very rapidly be able to take a protocol if it's been launched on Ethereum and then copy and paste that, change the name, pop it onto a new chain like Avalanche or what have you, and re-release it with maybe minor innovations, maybe just marketing it to a different community. And through that process, very highly iterative process, we see really rapid innovation because it is just so easy to do. So this idea of forking innovation and replicating it across the ecosystem in a sort of evolutionary sense is I think really critical to why we've seen the spiraling out of innovation in crypto and institutional discovery. The second part of that is actually what I'm really interested in the space right now, which is the growing what we call multi-chain interoperability. So I've listed a couple of blockchains already: Ethereum, Avalanche, Algorand, friends at Agoric. What we're seeing now is the interface between those chains. So the idea that we could bring assets and even have smart contracts on one chain interact with smart contracts on another chain. In the space, we talk a lot about the difference between new L1s, so new layer one blockchains, and potentially building other blockchains on top of existing blockchains, particularly Ethereum. Those are called layer two blockchains. Like Optimism or ZK Sync and so forth. The idea that we've got a network of bridges and communications protocols that allow us to knit this whole thing together. And in fact, one of the frontiers, as we see it in the coordination and of this space, is how can we get not just the layer one blockchains down the bottom there to interact with each other, but also, how can you move NFTs across different chains? Or more importantly, how can we have decentralized autonomous organizations that could work across multiple chains so that we're not dividing liquidity, so that we've actually got communities that ideally would be neutral to whatever chain they are on. Anyway, so I'm getting in the weeds here a little bit, but the key the key thing to point out, as I see it, is that interoperability and the composability of assets presents us with this very unusual, very rapidly evolving design space for institutional development. We are just seeing so much innovation because this huge network of institutions is developing out. So that's what we see in the crypto space. I want to just step back though, and I was thinking what would be an interesting topic for this group, because I'm keenly aware that many people here are follow crypto closely, and if you don't follow crypto closely, you're absolutely an informed crowd. So the thing that I've been thinking about recently is I got involved in crypto in around the 2016-17 period. So what the way we in crypto time everything, it's around bull market. So I got involved in at the start of the last bull market. And at the start of the last bull market, we were releasing, or the space we were releasing, the idea of decentralized smart contracts in Ethereum. Ethereum, the first major smart contract network, was released in 2015. And it sparked a enormous amount of really global conversation about what blockchain can do. The sort of iconic instance of that is the book by Tapscott and Tapscott that I've shown there, about how blockchain could revolutionize traditional industries or Web 2 industries, or we could build it into the real world. We spent a lot of time talking about how we can decentralize Uber or decentralize Airbnb, so the sharing economy. I personally spent a lot of time talking about how we can manage physical supply chains in the real world through blockchain technology. So how you could use blockchains to track assets as they traveled across the world. Even more recently, we've done a lot of work in self-sovereign identity, things like, can I put a driver's license on a blockchain? Can I use the chain to protect my own medical records in a way that means I control them, not a central database? We've done a lot of work on land titles, and it was in fact, there's been many experiments with, can we use a blockchain to manage land titles? Now, for the most part, as I'm obviously suggesting, these have been very slow to develop, and there are some instances of success, but for the most part, the revolutionary ideas that we were talking back then have not mostly come to pass. Now, there is a simple explanation for this, and the one that I usually go to is that connecting crypto and the real world is very difficult, and so the innovation that we have seen has been almost entirely on chain. As an example, I'll talk about consider supply chains. It's all well and good to have a digital twin of a physical good as it travels on supply chain, and you pop that on the blockchain. But of course, how can we ensure that the digital twin precisely reflects the state of the physical asset in the real world? There are some answers to this in Internet of Things technologies. There's a lot of work being done on this, but bridging that gap is very difficult, in the same way that computers are fantastic, but home printers are disastrous because the digital to physical link just doesn't work very well. But what I want to present to you is actually a slightly different explanation, as things drop or my room. So I think what's really happened is that in 2017, we didn't fully recognize how deep the innovation space was in crypto. So those predictions understated the innovation necessary for decentralization. As I say, many of those older projects still exist, but they exist as a semi-decentralized version of themselves. So the typical 2017 project was you would release effectively equity as a smart contract on Ethereum. So you'll have a token, but what did that token do, apart from, well, it's kind of like equity, it's kind of like a share. Maybe you'll put some computation necessary for your project on a blockchain. But what sort of decentralization is that? There's always going to be a company. There's always got to be an entrepreneurial mind. And there's always got to be some physical connection to the real world that is managed by individuals who work for someone. And so what we've seen here is that the frontier of in crypto right now is the movement of as much activity, economic exchange, computation, contracts on chain. And so the space right now is dealing with what seems to be actually quite simple problems, but are difficult in practice. So from a computational perspective, where are we going to store data? So if I'm going to use medical records, if I'm going to say, let's use a blockchain to store medical records, well, where? I mean, are we going to put it on chain, physically on chain, or all the details of my health experience? That doesn't seem very desirable for lots of obvious reasons. A more complicated one is in a decentralized system. A decentralized system or a DAO will still need to interact with companies. So who's going to sign the commercial contracts? We have answers to this, but they're very difficult answers to come to, and it's taken us a long time to really answer them. Another big problem, or another problem that has been difficult in the space is, well, DeFi itself. So DeFi didn't really exist in 2017, but what we've found as we've built out decentralized finance, we've had to completely rebuild many of the institutional assumptions that we've had around what a financial product looks like. So DeFi, unlike traditional financial products, can't rely on reputation, or can't rely on reputation very easily. It has a completely different regulatory profile. It is global first, so you can't launch it in a region and then go off. It is uncensorable. Just as a side note, in Australia, the Australian government will often tell us that if you want to experiment in DeFi, well, why don't you go and use the sandbox? There's a regulatory sandbox, but the sandbox, which provides some regulatory relief for financial products, has some interesting limitations around, well, you can't have more than $10 million or what have you, whatever the number is, going through the sandbox at any one time. If you're releasing a censorship resistant protocol, how can you stop that? How can you prevent any given amount of money? How you can prevent different types of activity from occurring? Lots of interesting issues. Happy to dive in. NFTs have offered a really complex menu of asset protection that are different to traditional ways of thinking about intellectual property. It's actually taken us a long time to understand that. And something that I'm quite interested in is how can we bridge the gap between crypto and what we understand to be decentralization and other attempts to decentralize digital institutions, for example, the Solid protocol and some other ones like that. Look, I'll wrap up here, or wrap up in a moment. But to conclude, what makes this interesting? So the history of human coordination is really a history of diverse experimentation. One of the things that if I had more time, and if our team had more time, I'd love to dive into is this idea of what we call cryptopaleoinstutionality, that my colleagues teased me, said, you'll never be able to pronounce that at 4 a.m. But I nailed it. This is the discovery of failed institutional forms that could be made effective through crypto and trust minimizing tech. So all these old medieval institutions, archaic institutions that that we look at with curiosity, can we dig some of those out and rebuild them, or like identify the underlying principles now that we've got this new technological menu? And of course, what design space has been denied to us given assumptions about trust and the absence of a technology like blockchain. And as I say, forking allows for high frequency iteration on innovation. Ultimately, crypto, as I see it, and as we see it, is solving that fundamental problem of institutional monopoly. Until recently, we live in one planet. We as individuals live in one country. We have one community. Therefore, we have a limited institutional set. Economists talk a lot about the limits to growth being the limits on the size of the market. But as we now see it, the limits to growth are really just the limits of the computational capacity for institutional experimentation. That's why crypto is interesting. That's why an economic historian like myself, my PhD was in the history of prudential regulation of banking in the 19th century in Australia, suddenly has found cryptocurrency and blockchain and computational institutional experimentation interesting. But I will wrap it up there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was quite the walkthrough. A really interesting terrain. One thing that I want to note on cryptopaleoinstitutionality is it would be really wonderful to collaborate with David Friedman on this, because he wrote this really
Yes.
wonderful book on like legal system very different to ours. And, he's part of this group. He's not here today, but he definitely has like at least a treasure trove of different institutions that one could put out. Mark, do you want to go for this? Because this is just on topic. Do you want to ask a question?
Sure. I love this paleo idea. I don't think I've actually heard that before. Could you give some good examples, some things that we'd really like to revive, that really look attractive to revive if we can, and that looks like crypto might solve the problem that made it unviable in the first place?
Yeah. So unfortunately, Alison has got it in front of me on that. A lot of what David Friedman has done around the Icelandic systems, like the Icelandic legal systems and competitive legal systems. Fundamentally, that's what we're talking about when, at a very practical level, we've been thinking about what dispute resolution processes look like in DAOs, especially if you're going to do not DAO to company relationships, but DAO to DAO relationships. We need ways to manage that and to identify, well, under what rule set am I being judged? We also need to think very carefully in the space about, well, what happens? We've got these decentralized communities, and decentralized communities are wonderful and I love them, but some people are not good members of decentralized communities. So we need to think about how we're going to organize things like ostracism out of those communities, and how we're going to enforce that ostracism as well. And of course, ostracism, the idea comes from ancient Greece, where they all got together and ostracized one or two people a year. I'm not sure we precisely want to do it that way, but digging out some of those ideas when is what we're thinking about with Cryptopaleoinstutionality, which again is such a great word. But this comes from the team that brought you the phrase institutional cryptoeconomics. So naming things is not one of our specialties, but here we are.
Wonderful. We have David Ahrens next.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was so much dense information covered very quickly. Very impressive. Yeah. There was one thing you said in the beginning that I'm especially curious to dig into a little bit more. You were speaking about how one of the attractive aspects of the whole cryptocurrency space is, as you came back to later, is how it allows for all its rapid experimentation very quickly and with real world conditions. It's not simply thought experiments with pencils. And what I'm curious is if you've seen innovations and lessons from this space that have already migrated back to the pre-blockchain world, or as you went on, I guess I was I wrote my question earlier, but now I'm also wondering if maybe that's not the one. It's not that it's going to migrate back. It's like, these are new institutions, and in order, whatever they're creating, it has to be top to bottom, decentralized. And so do you expect there to be a migration back, I guess is another way to word it, if you've seen any of that happening yet?
It's a great question. I think I'd like to almost challenge the premise of it in one way. So what I think we wildly underestimate the effect that Web 2 has had on the real world itself. The idea that, the weird thing that we hopped on in whenever Facebook was released, and now, it for many years now, it has been really at the center of politics. The Twitter Elon Musk thing, we all know that. So that is the real world now. So when we're thinking about what is the opportunity space for crypto, it's to displace the revolution that has already occurred. So this is the next revolution that makes the changes to the real world. Now, I would love to see, I thought you were going to ask me for an example of sort of that institutional experimentation, because literally, as I was preparing this, I was simultaneously working on a project that we're doing about new ways of voting that you can do in crypto. Time-weighted voting, conviction voting, a lot of people talk about quadratic voting. Lots of cool and interesting ways. I would love to see them migrate into traditional political systems, but I don't think that's how it's going to work. I think we're going to use these new institutional technologies to reform the way we manage the new forms of companies. We're going to use these new techniques to manage our new social media and those sorts of things. So I think the world is changing so rapidly that old world or that traditional world doesn't exist as we sort of separate it nicely.
Well, David, you can probably tell a tale or two about the voting aspects of that you're done with secure voting. Okay, and I also have a question, I guess, that I'd love to jump in with. So, at Foresight, we've been exploring if and how, we would turn some of our work into a DAO. And there's different ways of doing this. And I did a pretty deep dive in the past 2 months on this. One aspect that is difficult for me to comprehend is it too early to roll things over? Because currently, for example, we thought about there's a bunch of different individual DAO providers that would be interested in collaborating with us. There's also a bunch of different DAO tooling that is easy enough even for us to use, especially with this, with the help of this group, for example. But we mostly service scientists. Some of the chemists, that we service are pretty ignorant or alienated by crypto, and so I wonder if it's better to just wait it out a bit until potentially a first of the winners of the early experiments in DAOs have emerged, or at least in terms of tooling, or a little bit what the pitfalls are, and then roll things over. At the other hand, you could say it's also really good to be early and to be experimenting, but I just wouldn't want to set the 35-year old organization that I'm running and the scientists that I really, really care about supporting at risk for doing that. So I think, from a really practical angle, what do you think?
Yeah, look, thank you for engaging my advisory services. So yeah, look, it is early, but the technology now is matured. In fact, it's matured in the last 6 months, even to a huge extent. I think for a non-technical community or a community that has some non-technical members, the biggest challenge is not how can we manage the coordination, because that's evolving and you can evolve the DAO itself. It's actually things like key management and managing individual security, because there are ways to make it easier, but it's actually probably the hardest part about bringing on a non-specialist audience into the space. Lots of people working on solutions in that, lots of things like social recovery wallets. So there are answers, but that's probably the least mature part that we need to solve. And it's just a pure user experience, a pure, what does customer service look like in this sense? What happens when you have a community member who says, who calls you and says, look, I've lost my tokens because, I lost the passphrase. That's going to be an interesting and difficult problem. Happy to talk to you offline about ways that can be dealt with, but it's probably one of the problem is that people don't like talking about this because we're all very, very smart, and we're all very, very clever, and so we're pretty sure that we're good at this, but it's a pretty serious problem.
Yeah, thanks for that. I definitely we recently launched a D-side track at ETH Denver, and then had a bunch.
I was there. I failed to catch up with you. I was there.
Okay, wonderful. And we had a similar track now at ETH Amsterdam, I think last week. Oh my God, it sounds like ages ago. And so there, I think often people talk about the problem of how difficult it is to onboard the scientists in D-side. You need the scientists to also be involved in it. And there's now a few projects actually that are providing onboarding services, so the customer services that you said. Yeah. So I think in that sense, I think we may see a little bit more experimentation there. Also in terms of DAOification, right? Some organizations call their Discord servers DAOs, and they're proto DAOs, but in terms of a DAO, that is actually decentralized autonomous organization that is immutable, lives on the blockchain, works through token. What do you think is the cutoff point there? What for you is what does it take for you to be a DAO?
There is no definition of a DAO. Even the word autonomy, decentralized autonomous organizations, okay, that's great. What are we automating? Fundamentally, these are types of, so we have DAO-like forms in the real world, and we know that because we register them legally as unincorporated associations. A lot of DAOs have been registered as various things like that. Fundamentally, the question is, what sort of governance do you want to move on chain? It doesn't have to be all governance. It doesn't have to be deterministic. So you can still have a council of leadership that makes final it implements the final decisions of the community. You can have a DAO without a blockchain. There's nothing really inherently that prevents you from doing so. In that sense, that's maybe a little bit disheartening sounding, but I actually think that just tells you that you've got a design space that allows you to transition quite safely. You don't have to go max DAO on day one. In fact, sort of deterministic governance that executes automatically after a vote has got some really serious problems, as we saw quite recently with a governance attack in one of the DeFi protocols last week, I think it was. So you don't want to. You have a big design space. I'll just leave it there.
Okay, wonderful. I think one thing that we also talk about in the book is like, it's sometimes nice to have a little bit more malleability up front, and then later on I become more deterministic as like, you've seen the first playtest gone wire or not. Okay,
fundamentally, so just a point, fundamentally there's a human communities, and we have to keep that in mind. I mean, it's not an AI driven DAO. It's a DAO of humans. It's a way to coordinate a bunch of people and making sure that we have people centric technology, especially in the DAO space, is fundamental.
Does anyone agree with this? I know that Micah just disagreed. So does anyone disagree with this? I know Micah just disagreed in the chat, saying like, I'm pretty strongly in the camp that if a significant amount of your stuff isn't autonomous, then you just have a company that's security doesn't want the SEC to know. Anyone more in that camp? Feel free to raise your hand, just like via the button. It would be interesting to know. I know that. Okay, well,
look, Micah, you're not wrong. A lot of this stuff is regulatory arbitrage. I think it's a lot more than that, but a lot of it is.
Okay, well, great. You still have some time to disagree on this, but I will hand it over to Oliver for his presentation, and then afterwards, we still have some time to like back and forth discussion. Really interested also in seeing some of the parallels between your work, Chris, and Oliver's. So Oliver, I've known for quite some time from Berlin. He's been also a member of the Intelligent Cooperation Group. Has been working on a few interesting bits. Almost like more in the like Web 2 or like space. Memex is one of these bits that I think is also building in interesting ways, being inspired by part of the Xanadu work, part of the early Xanadu work, or at least it for me carries some of that forward. And then here's another project that just launched that is more in the new ways in which we can reinvent the financial space in crypto. So thanks a lot, Oliver, for joining. Give us just a brief update on what you're doing, and then we can open it up for discussion.
Sure. Thanks so much for the invitation. And yeah, I have the feeling that this group is going to be a really good one to talk about these two projects. Specifically, like intelligent cooperation is more is more visible or obvious with Memex, and the crypto commerce is going to be more obvious with Constancy. So Memex is a collaborative online research tool that allows you to collaboratively curate, annotate, and discuss websites, papers, videos. And Constancy is a fundraising platform for organizations who do not want to have these kind of uncapped return incentive structures that usually lead to extractive behavior of shareholders. So this means, how do we make it more easy for those organizations who always will have alternative funding structures, and so they will always have alternative contract structures to get to an agreement of how the contract looks like faster without needing to spend a lot of legal costs, and then fundraise from their community with or without crypto involved. It's really optional. But yeah, this is just a quick summary of those projects, and I'm gonna now first start to share Memex. Do you see my screen?
Yep, we're on the book club. Oh my God! Wow.
Yes. So
could you Command plus make the font a little bit larger?
Of course, yes. All right. So Memex's collaboration features, and it has also personal bookmarking and annotations capabilities, but focusing on the collaboration features, is trying to replace these workflows or upgrade these workflows where people that want to collaboratively curate, say, the initial information for a book club or for literature review or for just having a shared reading list, where you usually have either a Google Doc or some chat log where you post each other links, and it becomes very messy to actually have a conversation about this content. And so the way Memex improves that is essentially enabling you to share spaces. So these are basically like tags that are shareable. And I'm going to share the space now, and it will generate now 2 links. One is a view and commenter access link, which enables you to actually share it with anyone without them having to have or having to install the tool at all. And they can also then see your annotations and reply to them. And the second one is a contributor access, which enables you to invite them to add their own pages and their own annotations to the space, so you can see them then when you visit this content. And I'm probably going to share this one with you, Alison, later, so you can maybe play around with it a little bit on the book club, because I was actually pleasantly surprised to see that the book club is the entire book is on the web, which means we could potentially straight away use this. So yeah, the way it works is, if you're on a page, say this one, you have 3 different ways of annotating or changing the privacy of annotations that you make on this page. So the first one is private. So it's maybe use the tooltip, but you can also keyboard shortcuts, which I'm usually using. You can highlight it privately. You can highlight it and then add it to a specific space, which allows you to highlight and annotate the same page with multiple different contexts in mind. So for example, you want to make one highlight that is for the book club, one highlight is maybe for your team, the other highlight is going to go out more publicly. And so you have various different ways of working on this. And the way you do here is you either highlight and then go to the sidebar, or you press Option C, which opens the sidebar and which opens the picker, where you can then add, for example, Foresight Institute Book Club. And so this annotation is going to be only added to this space. And the last way of sharing is you can make something public. And public doesn't mean in this case that it is shared to everyone who visits the page. Public means that this annotation is going to be shared across all of the spaces that you put the page in. And it's more like a UX improvement, where these type of annotations are the ones that you want to share far and wide. They're more like tweets. And you don't want to share you don't want to go through every single annotation on every page that you want to just quickly share in a new context, because you want to reshare it with someone new, or you have created a new space that you share with someone new, and you want to share all of those annotations. And for that, you just press Shift on highlight, and then it's public, essentially. And you see here, it's going to turn public. And now, I'm the only person in this space, so that will mean that in the shared spaces, which is this tab here, there's only one item in there, and this is from this space, and those 2 annotations that landed here. You see this one that has not been shared is not ending up there, but I can reply here too. So, hey, this is interesting. This, and can have the conversation on the content. A really neat feature that I personally really appreciate is that you can also adjust the page width, and can leave the sidebar open, so that when I click outside, I can actually stay in a reading mode while doing these annotations. What I didn't show yet here is how it would look like if I send that link to that space to someone else. This is basically, if I click here on this go to space, this link is accessible by anyone who has it. So it means it's really easy to quickly share research that you've done with other people. Like, for example, this reading list about the book club. Yeah, and what else? All of the things that you organize with Memex are full text searchable. So if you remember any word from any of the articles that you saved or annotated, you will be able to recover them just with those words. So for example, if I'm just remember the word, let's take one, Peterson, I can press Option F, Peterson, and I see here all of the articles that have that word in it. And I can also filter by time. So that's the personal bookmarking part. Say, for example, I want to see everything before yesterday. So it's only going to be those. Or the domain, in this case, Substack. So this allows me also to really easily filter down back to get the things back that I already have annotated or collaborated on. Yeah, these are the rough basics of the software. I wonder if at that point there's any question specific to maybe the workflows that you see that you want to implement, or maybe see troubles implementing with this tool.
I think maybe we give people a little bit more time to think about it, and you can, go to the second project, and then we'll come back to it.
Sure. But any maybe here could be room to, if there's any understandability questions that are right now in the room where things were unclear the way I explained it before we move on to the second one.
Well, I'll just say it was a lot to absorb, so I don't feel like I got it on the first pass. I'm very glad this is recorded. I'll be watching the video again. One of the motivations that that a lot of people involved with Xanadu had for building Xanadu was the Popperian notion of criticism and the importance of criticism for the evolution of knowledge. And one of the things that we were trying to do is make criticism very visible and very available and at fine grain. And it looks like you're building up to support that well. So the idea being that while you're reading, for each individual step of what you're reading, you can ask the question, what is the best criticism of the particular point I'm reading right now, and to have that easily available. There's a big problem with that, which is finding the worthwhile criticisms. As we've seen, one of the tactics that we've seen in modern social media is what's been called flooding the zone with crap. That just by introducing lots and lots of noise, making all sorts of contradictory claims, you kind of get most people, to give up on trying to follow the argument and figure out what is credible in the face of a structure of arguments. Can you say anything about how you see such a medium growing to successfully counteract the flooding of the zone tactic and leading to navigable, credible arguments?
Very good question. Yeah, so we made a couple of decisions in the way the information will be received by you that may help to counteract those effects. One in particular is that you're always only going to be exposed to the annotations of spaces that you either follow or collaborate in. This means you have a very high degree of freedom, of intentionality, which spaces you're going to be exposed to, and at the same time also making it easier to compare. So I'm going to go maybe to this one to just see, to showcase how this looks like. There's a very recent one. So if you open up the shared spaces, you have an easier time to actually compare the different perspectives that are on this article without needing to search for that information necessarily proactively. And so this allows to kind of sense in these gray areas of information much faster. That takes a lot of the overwhelm away that is currently associated with getting different perspectives. Why, for example, on social media, it's very hard to find different perspectives on one post that is there, that is credible, that you haven't chosen. And you get a whole range of commentary from people that you have no trust relationship with, And so, yeah, these two factors could help to reduce that information overload a little bit, and at least open up the gates to this. The second quite important aspect, and why I personally am really happy that Elon Musk wants to take Twitter private, is that the pressure on growth and engagement that comes from uncapped investor returns leads organizations to make decisions that are against the curation of quality content and against the ability to kind of give users power to kind of design their own bubble ultimately. And my hope is that by taking away that pressure from Twitter, it opens up this ability that users are more in control of that. And actually is a really good segue to the second part of like why Constancy exists, this other platform and service, is because we decided against taking any investment money that expects uncapped returns. For that very reason, that we're clear that even if we now have a totally strong vision and value system, at some point this is outside of our control. It's going to be dictated by shareholders and all of the kind of complex dynamics that come from like being just a hyper growth company at a specific stage. And so what we needed to figure out is a way that enables us to grow in the beginning really fast, but then take away the greed engine that usually tips the company over a point where it becomes extractive. And yeah, so I hope this answers your question in some way.
So there's that's one of the directions of reacting to the pathologies of a public company, and especially an advertising-driven revenue model. The other way is kind of in the opposite direction, is to go decentralized and permissionless. Have you thought about what your media would look like if it were done in a decentralized, permissionless, and therefore uncensorable fashion? The danger with the way you are doing it is that it's still open to censorship.
Yep, that's very true, and that will maybe for the first couple of years be the case. What we hope we can get to relatively soon, though, is making it possible for people to subscribe to annotation feeds that are external to our application, so that we have no direct control over what is coming there. So basically like an enhanced RSS or something like that that people can subscribe to. But yeah, decentralization, and particularly on a data level with any form of blockchain technology is very difficult. And it's a system that right now is for us not feasible to maintain and to scale in a phase where we're still experimenting a lot with the primitives of the software, of how people share, how permissioning works, etc. And so we first want to get it to a point where the basic primitives and UX works, and then we can figure out which are the parts that we actually can selectively decentralize, just like a DAO, ultimately. Like it doesn't need to be all at once. Everything all at once. What was that new movie called? Everything all at once at the same time, or something like that. Yeah, doesn't need to be that.
Okay, you have maybe like a minute or two to talk about the second project.
It's very short. So what we essentially want to do, like I introduced before already, is we had a lot of trouble to actually first come to the contract agreements of designing alternative investment contracts, and second, to then find investors that want to invest, because the classic VCs, it's a very different mental model to wrap their head around. Banks only invest in companies that have already some revenue. Grants are hyper-specific and hyper-competitive. And Patreon, etc., are mostly donation-based if you want to go to your community. And what I think is a missing piece is that those organizations like ours that have users, that have passionate users, want to invest in their company, but also want to utilize that superpower more effectively. And so what we're currently building up is a consultancy business that streamlines the process of organizations who want to deploy alternative funding models or refi and capped return models to get to the contracts So a bit like if people are familiar with Juicebox, it's a kind of a modular contract generator for smart contracts. Having that at the end that enables self-service contract design, and then port that optionally or make it optionally available in blockchain ecosystems. So that's one part of the project. And the second part of the project is essentially a streamlined process for organizations to fundraise from their community. It's up the top, which is in the very basic form, a profile that explains what the project is about, what the terms are of the project, and then for an investor that is usually not necessarily very kind of legally educated, to quickly understand what that contract is about. So this means what do you want to invest? What are the different contract terms that you're signing in a very clear language? What are your details? How do you want to receive the money and send the money? And then the next step is a payment, e-signature process. And the next step is automatic hook into either your banking system, into your Ethereum wallets, etc. So really make that a 3-4 step process for someone that wants to invest $1,000 in your project, that wants to maybe get a 5x return or something like that, or maybe 10x even, but that's up to the contract itself. And just wants to support you and wants to get something in return. Our main challenge right now is actually what has been coming up already. What are the building blocks and the bridges between the real world legal system and these more like digital fundraising tools, which we're actually right now in the mode of figuring out. We got a €150,000 research grant from the EU to start this research. And actually, if anyone is interested and has a legal background and wants to support the process, we're super open, because ultimately all of the knowledge that we generate here, all of the contract terms, these modular pieces, we want to make open source. And this is already an open source software, so that the entire corpus of how can I design an alternative funding contract in a different jurisdiction become public knowledge, ultimately. Yeah, that was a super quick rundown, hopefully 2 minutes.
Very quick. Okay,
Yes.
wonderful. I'll quickly stop sharing your screen. We have 5 minutes left now, exactly. I have one question that I usually always try to ask speakers that come in here, which is, what is the number one challenge that you would like to see solved for the field to move along, to really, I think, actually make progress on the futures that you guys can imagine? Like, if someone now was listening in on this and was like excited to get into the space, what's there to solve? Like, where do you want to direct people's attention to? What's practical? Chris or Oliver, whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I have a very practical one. So from a regulatory point of view, right now, people who want to sell a security go and tie it to a token that is also utility. And that is kind of a dirty workaround to get around the question, is it a pure security, and thus does it need to be regulated as security? But on a very practical level for all of those communities, it actually presents a big challenge, because it means their token can neither be used for payment because it's so speculative, and it can also not be used for a actual investment, because you cannot really sell a security if you're not like going to through the entire process of prospecting. So I hope that in the next maximum 5 years, we get to a point of enabling much less regulatory overhead to actually sell a security, so that companies and communities can clearly say, this is a security that we're selling for investing in our product. This is a token that we use that is maybe a deduction of that security that you can use to pay in our platform, but it's a stable value. I think this is a very, very big issue that I hope will be solved.
Wonderful. Chris?
Yeah, that's a really good one, Oliver. I think also that's one of the reasons that we have countries that aren't the United States as well. And I think the action will have to happen there. Look, the big thing that I'm interested in right now, or one of the biggest problems, is that how can we organize decentralized communities in a way that they're actually efficient and effective at what they're doing? So I love DAOs. They are spectacularly ineffective, or the median DAO is spectacularly ineffective at making decisions. But because I'm a DAO bull, I want to explore how we can make DAOs not just bad companies, but actually competitive against the corporate form. They are different, so they'll be competitive on different margins and efficient on different margins. But how can you organize decision-making, responsibility? How can you got entrepreneurial drive in a decentralized organization is actually the hardest problem that I think in the space. So many technical problems, but once we build the technology, we need to make it fly, and that's the overwhelming fear that I have, that that it's not flying as fast as it could.
I mean, to the extent that I know of, like, really a billion project, not a billion, but not literally, but so many people are now spinning out their DAO. So I think even coming back here one year later will be, I think, really interesting, like learning curve to do. There's, like MetaGov and a few others that are really doing like some of the meta research. I know that you've also published on like governance on the blockchain, right? Because you will make a post on this. And so I think we'll at least learn a ton. To some extent, I almost wonder whether they're just recreating a few of the, like, they do sometimes look like companies from the inside, or like, they're kind of like,
Right now, the median DAO is a Discord channel with a bank account, and we need to, move it past that.
Okay, anything very concrete on what people can do here? Like, is it like meta study, or is it just spin out a few DAOs that do different things? Or, if someone was like, okay, I'm game, what would they do?
Again, it's institutional experimentation. So we're working a lot, thinking about delegation, thinking very heavily about, how can we, what voting mechanisms that can align incentives much better, what the goal of the organization, the coordination actually is. There's a lot of different marginal choices that have to be made. I think we're making progress, but also communicating that progress is interesting too.
Wonderful. For what it's worth, we're currently trying to integrate Metaculus and like more prediction market styles into our Discord to actually know them to influence the decision.
Which to Oliver's point is a real regulatory risk.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, it's interesting, like, especially the two divides. Okay, wonderful. Hey, thank you so much. And Chris, go back to bed. Thank you so much for joining.
No, I have a call with Agoric at 6:30, so in an hour and a half.
Well, I hope I gave you lots of fodder for distraction during that call. Thank you to everyone who joined. I think Oliver posted that if someone wants a personal onboarding to Memex, it's here in the chat. I really look forward to how they can spur much of the innovation process. I'll reach out to you about the book, like whether we can do some annotation on that. But thank you everyone for joining. It was really, really wonderful. Thanks for your questions. And can't wait to see you for the next time. I should say this Sunday, book club starting 11 a.m. Pacific time with Mark, Christine, and I on Zoom. It should be in your calendar. If it isn't, let me know. And then we have a few updates that are quite exciting during the book club time. So thanks everyone for joining. It was really, really wonderful. And I'll see you soon.